Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala sayyidina wa habibina rasulillah wa ala alihi wa man wala. اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين ووفقنا توفيق الصالحين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وقل ربي زدني علما. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, thank you for all the wonderful comments. I was told they got a lot of positive comments, so I want to just thank everybody for having a good opinion. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward all of you. May Allah bless your Ramadan, inshallah. And we're here looking at Ibn Juzayy al-Kalbi's work on at-Tasheer li ulum at-Tanzir, particularly his muqaddimah. And then I'm going to look at a few other things, including Imam al-Ghazali's theory of al-Jawahir in the Quran. Imam al-Ghazali has a very interesting book where he looks at the most important, what he called the Jawahir, which here really means essences, but they're the jewels of the Quran, and he uses that terminology. Ibn Juzayy al-Kalbi radiyallahu anhu is one of the great scholastics of the 8th century. He died in 741. He was an Andalusian from Granada, and he had the great fortune of living when there was still a very strong tradition there. It broke down, obviously, and eventually led to the loss of Andalusia. But in his themes of Quran, he basically looks at what he considered to be the 7 themes that the Quran goes into. And so I'm going to be looking at that today, those 7 themes. But before I did, I actually wanted to look at something from another Andalusian who influenced the great Ibn Juzayy al-Kalbi, who was Qadi Abu Bakr Ibn al-Arabi. And Qadi Abu Bakr, radiyallahu anhu, he wrote 2 tafsirs. One is called Ahkam al-Quran, which is in 4 volumes, a very famous work. It's one of the most important works on the juristic aspect of the Quran. He was a student of the great Hujjat al-Islam, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. And one of the most really extraordinary scholars, but he wrote his Rihla, and he talked about first meeting Imam al-Ghazali, and he was actually the last person that Imam al-Ghazali took as a kind of personal student, and that was how brilliant he was. But he in his Ahkam al-Quran, his other Quran, unfortunately, which was apparently 30 volumes, was lost. So a lot of the Andalusian works we don't have. He mentions in Surah Al-Baqarah the verse أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ خَرَجُوا مِنْ دِيَارِهِمْ وَهُمْ أُلُوفٌ حَذَرَ الْمَوْتِ. Haven't you seen those who left their homes in the thousands out of fear of death? فَقَالَ لَهُمَ اللَّهُ مُوتُوا ثُمَّ أَحْيَاهُمْ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to them, die, and then after that He brought them back. So he mentions that the reason for this was because of a plague, a waba, that had afflicted the people of Bani Israel. So he says, أَنَّ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ لَمَّا سُلِّطَ عَلَيْهِمْ رِجْسُ الطَّاعُونَ. Ta'un in Arabic generally means the black plague, but it actually can mean also any epidemic or pandemic. But if it's used on its own, it means the black plague. But an epidemic also would have been, they're called waba or obia, and influenza was certainly something in the pre-modern world. Some Arabs have suggested that it's from influenza, which is the nose of the goat, because it's always wet, you know. So, but anyway, that's one of those very dubious etymologies. So he says in here that they fled the plague, and because of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused them to die, really as a punishment for fleeing the plague. So this is something relevant to us. So what he says here now is that Abdurrahman ibn Auf said, سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إذا سمعتم به بأرض فلا تقدموا عليه وإذا وقع بأرض وأنتم بها فلا تخرجوا فرارا منه. This hadith, which is a sound hadith, muttafaqun alayh, it's Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim related. This hadith actually came from a situation where Umar radiallahu anhu was with the Sahabah and they were on their way to Sham. And then they heard about Ta'un Amwas. And so Omar was thinking about going, just continuing on the journey. And he had a shura, he had the Quraysh, and then he had the Ansar, and they had a shura, and then it was Abdurrahman ibn Auf who brought this hadith. And this is important because the Sahaba did not necessarily know all of the hadiths. There's over 30,000. I mean, out of the sound hadiths, it's a smaller number. But there are some will put them up to almost 54,000 hadiths. So there were a lot of hadiths that the Sahaba might not have known or heard, that the Prophet ﷺ said it in a gathering, and he might have said it with one of the Sahaba. So that happens in the Ahad hadith. Sometimes it's only one person that relates it from the companions. So the Prophet ﷺ mentioned this, that if you hear about it, bihi, in other words, al-waba, because this was in the context of a conversation with Umar, in a place, bi-ardin, meaning just a geographical area, don't go into that area. وَإِذَا وَقَعَ بِأَرْضٍ وَأَنْتُمْ بِهَا فَلَا تَخْرُجُوا فِرَارًا مِنْهُ. But if it happens and you're in it, don't flee from it. So, it's very interesting to note how they viewed this, because I think a lot of modern scholars attempt to create this idea of the infectious nature, that this was about the infection and preventing infection. In fact, in our tradition, we really believe in the inertness of things. I mean, we do assert sababiyya, and so it's not to deny causation. Causation is real, but we also understand that there's no causation without God, that God is the one that is ultimately the cause of all things, and so it's very important to reflect deeply on this pre-modern worldview, which is so different from our worldview. So here's what he says about it. اختلف العلماء في وجه الحكم في ذلك. So our scholars differed about why the Prophet ﷺ would have said that. Now, obviously, we could argue now he said it because of infectious disease, and that would be probably a more modern argument. But look at how they looked at it. The first, الأول ما فيه من التعرض للبلاء. The Prophet told us, do not put yourselves in situations. He said in a hadith, المؤمن لا يذل نفسه. The believer should not humiliate himself or put himself in a position of idlal, where he's in a humbled situation. And they asked him, how do you do it? And he said, يَتَعَرَّضُ لِلْبَلَاءِ مَا لَا يُطِيقُ. That he puts himself in a situation of tribulation that he's not able to withstand. So he's warning us about that. And so in this hadith, they're saying that that's the reason. It's ta'arrud lil bala, which the Prophet prohibited us from doing. And this is why even traditionally in war, you don't go into a situation where you're going to lose, right? The Muslims, in fact, there's a British historian of military history who argued that the reason the Muslims were so effective is because fleeing the battlefield was not shameful if the odds were against them, right? Because in pre-modern battles, they often fought till they were either dead or slaves. Whereas in the Islamic tradition, you can't flee, it's like min al-kaba'ir. But if the general or whoever's in charge calls for a retreat, that was dishonorable in pre-modern warfare, whereas the Muslims' kar wa far became a very strong tactic. And so that was, so that's one aspect there of the. So he says, لا يجوز في حكم الله تعالى فإن صيانة النفس عن كل مكروه مخوف واجب. Because to protect or guard the self from everything that's makruh is an obligation. Anything that is fearful or harmful is an obligation. And the second opinion, إنما نهى عن دخوله لئلا يشتغل عن مهمات دينه بما يكون فيه من الكرب والخوف بما يراه من عموم الآلام وشموم الأسقام. So in other words, you don't put yourself in a situation that you're going to become so preoccupied and anxious about it, because this is the human condition, that it will preoccupy you from doing what you're created to do, which is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's a beautiful explanation. والثالث, the third opinion, ما يخاف من السخط عند نزول البلاء به وذهاب الصبر على ما ينزل من القضاء. The fear that you will actually get angry at the decree, so or lose your patience. So that's a real fear for people, because people do lose their faith. People can be tested with they lose their child and suddenly they've lost their faith, and I've seen that happen, which to me is, I would hate to have that tribulation, and may Allah preserve all of you and myself, but it's not yours in the first place. I mean, Allah gives and Allah takes back. So that we have an istislam about these things, where this is Allah's business, it's not our business. And there's a great lesson in Surah Al-Kahf with Al-Khadr and the boy that he kills, that you don't know what the outcome of something is. So the fourth reason, ما يخاف عليه من سوء الاعتقاد. It's a fear that they will actually their aqidah will be corrupted because of the belief of infection. So they'll think that it was the disease it was because of the plague that they got the disease, instead of seeing it as the qadr, that this is from Allah. It's because nothing afflicts you except Allah decreed it for you. And so it's the belief that there's actually going to be a corruption. So كأن يقول, as if he could say, لولا دخولي في هذا البلد لما نزل بي من مكروه. Like, had I not gone there, this wouldn't have happened. Well, it could happen wherever you are. It's like when the Bedouin, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا عدوى ولا طيرة. He said there's no infectious diseases. And again, this is haqiqah. So don't think he's not negating, because he also said, فِرُّ مِنَ الْمَجْدُومِ كَمَا تَفِرُّ مِنَ الْأَسَدِ. That's in Sahih Bukhari. Flee from the leper like you flee from a lion. So again, it's really important to remember that this is not, we have bifocals spiritually. We have bifocular vision. We have sharia and we have haqiqah. And our deen has always understood that distinction between those two. So that's really important to remember. So we assert causation, we don't deny it, but we also recognize that it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the end. And this is what we have to see. And so that's all for going into. Now look at the difference for leaving. وَأَمَرْ خُرُوجْ فَإِنَّمَا نُهِيَ عَنْهُ لِمَا فِيهِ مِنْ تَرْكٍ مَرْضَى. Because they would abandon the sick people. So there's no mercy in it. Like the healthy people have an obligation to stay and take care of the sick people. من ترك مهملين مع ما ينتظم به مما تقدم والله أعلم. So they have an obligation to help them, right? So and then the other one, the Malikis actually considered going into was makruh. If you had yaqeen, whereas leaving it was haram. So they actually made a distinction that you could go in to help them, for instance, like it's not an absolute prohibition as long as you had yaqeen that whatever happened to you was from God. So I thought that would be useful just as just to look at the situation that we're in. So now to look at this, I mentioned yesterday, and just to reiterate a few things. One, he's looking at the purpose of the Quran in terms of its summary purpose, so the jumla altogether. And he said the first thing was it was da'wat al-khalq ila ibadat al-haq wa dukhuli fi dinihi. So it's an invitation to creation to enter into the religion with God and to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he said that there's bawa'ith that go with that. So there's going to be incentives. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala incentivizes it. So now if you get into what he calls the tafsil, right? He gives the 7 here meanings, that the purposes of the Quran. So the first one is ilm al-rububiyyah, which is to teach you about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the fundamental and primary purpose of the Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, right? I mean, Allah begins in the name of Allah. If you take the Shafi'i position, if you take the Maliki, it's Alhamdulillah. The Quran begins with Alhamdulillah. But it begins with Allah. It ends with Nas. So the last word in the Quran is Nas. So it begins with Allah, it ends with Nas, and between the two is the message of Allah to Nas. So this is the book of Allah that is sent to humanity. And so the ilm al-rububiyyah is to know Rabbul Alameen, and that's why he begins Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. It begins with rububiyyah, like who's your Lord? You're lorded over, you are marbub, you're makhluk, you know, and your very createdness should intellectually demand a recognition that there's a creator. This idea that this kind of modern quantum view that things just popped into existence, it's a little hard to swallow for people that just think even superficially about because we know that this wasn't here forever. We know this. Even our material sciences had indicated that. And even the most primitive peoples have always understood that. And not because they were primitive, but because they were human, right? So no matter how intellectual you get, no matter how intelligent you get, that's not the reason that you're denying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're denying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because your fitrah has been so distorted by civilization and by a kind of abstraction in your mind. And this is why the vast majority of human beings have believed in some force outside of themselves, whether it was animistic or polytheistic. They believed that there was something outside of themselves, whereas modern man is unique in this way. Modern human beings are very strange. So that's ilm al-rububiyyah. The second one is nubuwwah. So the Quran comes to tell us about prophecy. And now one of the most amazing things about prophecy is if you study philosophy, every philosopher will negate the philosophy of their teachers or the ones that went before them. They'll just differ with them. So, and beginning with Socrates and Plato, and then Plato and Aristotle, I mean, beginning in the beginning, it's very interesting. Or the pre-Socratics, who somebody said everything's fire, and then somebody said everything's water, somebody said everything's fire. And they're all differing. The prophets, if you study the prophets, they don't differ. And they come over a period of like 1,000 years. And yet they're all saying the same thing, that there's a God, here's what he wants you to do, and then you're going to be judged. You're going to be raised up and you're going to be judged. And you have a soul. They're consistent in that. Where they differ is in the shariah, in the details of the law because of the times and places. That's where they differ. But they don't differ in what are called the thawabit. You know, there's thawabit and mutaghayyirat. There's, you know, the sharia it differs, but the aqidah is the same. So the aqidah remains the same. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said that all of the prophets are brothers from different mothers. So the mothers are the sharia, but the father is the aqidah. So it's the same father, but the mother is different. So the aqidah is the same. That's the father, but the mother is the sharia. And so he said we're all brothers, but illat, banu illat, which means we have different mothers. So the sharia is different, but our father is the same. It's the haqiqah. So, and then the next one is the ma'ad, which is resurrection. So ma'ad means the place you're going back to, right? Eid in Arabic is from 'ada ya'udu, right? So so ma'ad is the place you go back to. So inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We were already there, and we have this recollection. You know, Plato called it the recollection, you know, this memory of a previous life. You know, we all have this embedded somewhere in our souls, and it comes up periodically through life, where we kind of have these strange moments of things like deja vu and other things where, you know, I recognize something. And then you have al-ahkam, which are the rulings, the sharia itself. So divinities, prophecies, resurrection, or eschatology, you know, what happens after life, and then ahkam. And then the ahkam relate to, we'll get into that, what they relate. And then finally al-wa'ad, al-wa'id, and al-qasas. So al-wa'ad is the promise in Arabic. So إِذَا أَعِيدُكَ شَيْئًا هَذَا وَعَد. You know, so a wa'ad is a promise to do something. A wa'id is a threat, you know, and it's, you know, it's the same as one of these Arabic things where they have the same root, but they mean very different things. So, you know, u'iduka, like, you know, wayhaka, Yusuf, like if I make a threat like that, and then you have to, okay. Now, the nice thing about the Arab tradition, which is in our understanding of Aqidah, is that Allah can break his threat, and it doesn't diminish him in his lordship. So if Allah says, I'm going to punish you, and then on Yawm al-Qiyamah he says, I forgive you, that is actually acceptable in Aqidah, whereas he won't break his promise. So the promise will be fulfilled if he promises us, but the threat, that's up to him. فَعَالُ لِمَا يُرِيد, right? And then you have al-qasas, which are the stories. Now, one of the most extraordinary things about this this division is all of them are in the Fatiha. So the Fatiha it's al-Kitab in that way, because it has all of it's the matrix of all of the meanings of the Quran. So you have علم الربوبية الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. You have the ma'ad. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. You have the ahkam. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. You have the nubuwah. You know, the صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم من النبيين والصديقين والشهداء والصالحين. Right? And then you have the wa'id. غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. The qasas. Like all the qasas of so it's all there in Fatiha. All of these meanings can be perceived in the Fatiha. So that's quite extraordinary. So now we're going to, inshallah, go into these details. And I'll just do this one, and then we'll open up for question and answer, inshallah. So in the Jumla, which is the summation of it, the Quran invites creation to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and enter into his deen. So that delineates worship. First of all, there has to be a bayan, a clarification of who your Lord is that you're being called to, and what is his deen that you're being called to. And so that's where you get the usul al-aqaid, which are the foundations of belief, and this is what we call usul al-din. It's also called ilm al-kalam, and ilm al-kalam in the first few centuries was a very negative term, but over time the Muslims adopted it, the ulama. So when you see a lot of attacks, I mean, some of these modern books, you get these scholars that write books against kalam, and they'll quote like Imam Shafi, or they'll quote the early scholars and how evil kalam is. That's all true, those are all true. But kalam in that early period meant something different from the later period. And so it's important to be aware of that, because you will see negative statements about kalam, but it's a technical term. It's like tasawwuf. A lot of people don't like that term, but the ulama used it. I mean, they adopted it. So there's bad kalam, there's bad Sufism, all these things have negative downsides, but as a technical term, it was adopted for theology, what we would call dialectical theology, which is it gets into more theoretical things. So, and they considered it necessary, and that's why a lot of the greatest scholars were mutakallimun, like Imam al-Juwayni and Imam al-Ghazali and others. So, and then the second is the ahkam al-amal. So that's the deen. So you're being called to Allah, and so that's the aqidah, to teach you who your Lord is. And then you're being called to enter into His deen. And so that is the ahkam al-amal. And those will go into the ahkam al-badaniyya, ahkam al-qalbiyya, right? Ahkam al-ijtima'iyya. I mean, there's different, like siyasa shar'iyya, there's different types of ahkam. All right, so your personal rulings that relate to you personally, the rulings that relate to your transactions with others, and then also there's rulings that relate to, like, the ruler, that don't apply to us or the government, things like that. But then that also provides motivation to do this repeatedly. So how does Allah entice us into this deen? And that's with al-jazar wal-asa. I mean, this is basically, we are designed to respond to carrots and sticks. This is the human condition. And Allah created us, so He knows us better than anybody. Not everybody, Rabi al-Adawi is a great example, not everybody is motivated by the carrot and the stick, but the vast majority of human beings are motivated by the carrot and the stick. And so this is targhib and tarhib. So the Quran has targhib, and that's the majority, believe it or not. So the majority is actually encouraging. And then the tarhib is to create fear in you. Like, I don't want to. And that's out of the love that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has for His creation, is the warning. That you warn people you love. If you don't care, if somebody's headed for a cliff and, you know, he holds your mortgage, you know, a lot of people will just let him fall over that cliff. You know, you're going to warn people that you actually care about, right? And that's why the prophets warn everybody, because they care about all of humanity. So that's where we are. And then tomorrow we're going to go into, inshallah, these in detail and give some examples from the Quran, inshallah. And then, you know, when we get to the qasas, I want to get into and give you some really interesting examples of repetition in the Quran, and why repetition really is much deeper than it appears outwardly when you look at things. You'll see, like in one ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about the ithna asharata ayna, it says infajarat ithnata ashara ayna, you know, infajarat. But in another ayah it says imbajasat, you know, and these are two different words that have very different meanings. I mean, they both apply to water flow, but you'll see why in one ayah Allah uses infajarat, and in another ayah He uses imbajasat. You know, because they're related to the meaning. And the secret of the Quran, again, we get back to the impossibility of imitating the balagha of the Quran. And you will see, the deeper you go into balagha, and this is why balagha in the trivium, all right, you're going to get debates on this, okay? But in the trivium, the master science is balagha. It's not grammar and it's not rhetoric, because balagha presupposes grammar and rhetoric. Balagha is the master science. And this is why civilizations are always obsessed with balagha when they're strong. They're obsessed with two things. When civilizations are vibrant, there are two things they're obsessed with: space and law. Space is quantitative science, law is qualitative. Space is understanding order in the heavens, law is understanding order in the earth. Stars and bars. I mean, it's very interesting that America took as a flag stars and bars. And what is the most potent tool in law? It's persuasion. Because when you want to legislate something, you have to persuade that body of lawmakers that this is a good thing. And where does persuasion, what is the science of persuasion? Rhetoric. And so astronomy and rhetoric, right? This is it. It's all in there. So Harun, wa akhi Harun. Questions?
Yes,
answers?
sir. Barakallah feek.
Harun has a lot of answers too.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much for what you have taught us so far, mashallah. The first question is, what is your opinion on the omission of the Bismillah from Surah Taubah? There is the idea that it was never clarified by the Sahabah, but is that just sabab to the true meaning, that this is God's final call?
The main reason that Imam Malik, first of all, saw that the ayahs, the Basmala was only an ayah in Surah Al-Ankabut. That was Malik's opinion. I tend to feel like that really is the strongest opinion, because the thing about the Quran, there's no khilaf about the Quran. So the fact there's a khilaf about the Basmala means that I think his opinion is the soundest opinion. In the hadith al-Qudsi, it says, قَسَمْتُ بَيْنِ الْفَاتِحَةَ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَ عَبْدِي. That's in Sahih al-Bukhari. قَسَمْتُ الْفَاتِحَةَ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَ عَبْدِي فَإِذَا قَالَ عَبْدِي الْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. With all respect to the Shafi'is, because they have to recite the Basmala in the Fatiha. But so that's a opinion. Now, Imam Malik saw the Basmala as they were to demarcate the beginnings of the surahs. And this is why if you read Nafi', which is the qira'ah of the Malikis in North Africa, in Libya they recite Qalun, in the rest they recite Warsh. Sudanese actually recite Abu Amr, I think. But the Malikis recite, because Nafi' was the Muqri of Medina. And so in the Maliki school, the Basmala is it separates, and that's why when you read it, it's mandub to say the Basmala, but you don't have to when you recite the recitation of Nafi', Warsh, Imam Warsh, like they recite in Morocco and Mauritania. So in here, that he says that Ibn Juzayy says, وتسمى سورة التوبة وتسمى أيضا الفاضحة لأنها كشفت أسرار المنافقين. So it's also the scandalizer, because it scandalizes the hypocrites, right? واتفقت المصاحف والقراء على إسقاط البسملة من أولها واختلف في سبب ذلك. Right? So there's a difference of opinion about why that is. فقال عثمان بن عفان اشتبهت معانيها بمعاني الأنفال وكانت تدعى القرينتين. So he says that Uthman ibn Affan saw that it got confused with Anfal before it. And so they were called, the two went together. So they were called the Qarinatain. So they didn't separate between the two because the meanings are so related in Surah Al-Anfal and Surah Taubah. So that was Uthman ibn Affan's في زمان ولذلك قرنت بينهما right, so they're put into the سبع الطوال. Right. وكان الصحابة قد اختلفوا هل هما سورتان أو سورة واحدة. Right. Are they one or they're two? فتركت البسملة بينهما لذلك. وقال علي بن أبي طالب البسملة أمان. So Ali ibn Abi Talib said the Basmala is a security, right? وَالْبَرَاءَةُ نَزَلَتْ بِالسَّيْفِ. So, the very beginning of it is بَرَاءَةٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ عَاهَدتُّم مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Like, it's telling them they're given 4 months, and then, so there's a real threat. This is a surah that has a intense wa'id, and so it's inappropriate for the Basmala to be in a wa'id. And this is why there's a famous story about, I think it was al-Asma'i was reciting the Quran once, and he recited the surah about the sariqa wa sariqa, faqta'u aydiyahuma, and then he says, Inna Allah ghafur rahim. And the Bedouin said to him, هذا كلام من? He said, هذا كلام رب العالمين. He said, مستحيل. He said, impossible. And he said, what? And then he went back, he realized he made a mistake on the ayah. He said, Ghafur Rahim. And he said, oh, Azizun Hakim. He said, that's Allah's. And he said, why did you know that? He said, because you can't say cut off the hand and say then he's merciful and forgiving. لكن عز فحكم. Right? So that's that's what, you know, the rhetoric is called, it's al-maqal الذي يناسب مقتضى الحال, right? So it has to be appropriate with the circumstances. And this is why in these circumstances to say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, it would be more appropriate to say Bismillah al-Hakam al-Muntaqim or something like that, or al-Aziz al-Hakim. But Allah left it just bara'atum min Allahi wa rasuli. Khalas. Yeah. Next one.
Thank you for that. Next question is, in regards to storytelling in the Quran being a powerful tool, what is your opinion of writing quote-unquote Islamic fiction, especially in times where there is a need for halal avenues for leisure and thought?
Great question. Not only writing, but I think also Muslims have to produce really world-class literature, film, all of these things. Muslims should be, you know, عَاقِبُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا عُقِبْتُمْ بِهِ. Allah says, fight them with what they fight you with. You know, and there's a story about the man who, you know, the founder of the Salvation Army. You know, he used to write these hymns with the tunes of popular songs, the very popular songs. And somebody said to him, you know, why are you using popular songs to you know, put hymns to? And he said, I don't want the devil to have all the best tunes, you know. So that's part of the problem, is that, you know, the demonic stuff, I mean, it's like Christian cinema is really, tends to be really poor generally. And that's unfortunate. That's not the way it should be. I mean, obviously the demons are helping the other ones, I think, so they get the extra boost. But I would say it's very important. Also fiction, our tradition, the Prophet ﷺ told the story, it's one of my favorite hadiths, the story of Zara'. Is that a true story? Allahu alam. But the way it's told, it's an incredible piece of literature, just as an event. And the Prophet also used stories as examples, things like this. We know that the Prophet only spoke the truth, but the ulama wrote, for instance, the maqamat, which, I mean, when I was studying Arabic many years ago, and I dip into them every once in a while, but I love the maqamat genre, which is fiction. And these were great ulama. Al-Hariri was a great alim. Badi'u Zaman al-Hamadani was a great alim and a great, you know, very pious man. And as Jarullah Zamakhshari wrote his maqamat in the Haram. So the maqamat are amazing fictionalized stories. One of the things that I learned, you know, in thinking about the maqamat, because like Badi'u Zaman al-Hamadani in his maqamat, the character Abu Fath al-Iskandari is a nasab. He's a charlatan, he's a con artist, but he's a religious con artist. And I really felt that he was warning people about people that use religion and con people with religion, that character is a real character. He's worse than a mafioso. I'll take a don any day of the week, because at least the don, you know what you're dealing with. You know, but a religious charlatan who uses religion to fool people, and we're more susceptible to being fooled by piety than we are by other things. because it's so hard. If you're just an ordinary, average, common two type of person, it's so difficult for you to imagine somebody using God to trick people. It's really hard for people that are normal because it's such an enormity. And so fiction's really important, but I think it should be good. Like I really think Muslims should get back to itqan and ihsan. And there's a lot of people that just, it's like poetry. It's better to memorize great poetry and be a rawi than to write really bad poetry. I mean, that's my opinion, you know. And people love to hear poems recited. They sound much better when they're recited than when they're read. But the Arabs have that tradition of the rawi. They weren't poets, but they loved poetry, so they would just memorize a bunch of poetry and then they would recite it, you know. So, but we're in an age, you know, somebody asked Fran Lebowitz, you know, what advice do you give to young writers? And she said, stop writing. You know, and you know, her point, which she elaborates on, was that the self-esteem movement has made everybody think they're talented. And first of all, you can learn to write, but it takes a long time to really become a good writer. And so that's where I would say, you know, learn how to write first. And that takes time. And that means learning rhetoric. It means reading a lot of great literature. Next one.
Thank you for that. There are multiple questions, mashallah. Lots of questions in common about the structure of the Quran that we have today in terms of juz and the surah. So it looks like if I were to summarize it, it's could you elaborate further on the structure that we have today?
Right. Well, I mean, the Muslims, traditionally, the sunnah was to read, the sunnah of the Muslims was to read the Mus'haf at least once a month. So you did it 12 times a year. In Ramadan, they tended to maybe do it 2, 4, or more times. And in fact, when the Prophet ﷺ complained, اتخذوا, you know, هذا القرآن مهجورا اتخذوا قومي هذا القرآن مهجورا. You know, my people have taken this Quran, have abandoned it. In the commentaries, they say that if you read it twice a year, that you're not under that hukam. But if it's less than that, then it's like you've abandoned the Quran. You know, so it's good to read it. So for that reason, it was put into the ajza. And so that came later. That did not come from the Prophet ﷺ or from the Salaf. It came later. And then they did the ahzab because they read it at Maghrib and after Asr. So for instance, in Morocco, and believe it or not, every month there are 250,000 khatam in the masjids of Morocco. And that's been calculated by the Ministry of Awqaf. Since the time of the Muwahidun, the Moroccans have been reciting the Quran in the masjid, and they do it, initially they did it between, after Fajr, they did a hizb, and then after Asr, because those are times people don't pray. So it was, and those are the really good times for bil-ghadwi wal-asal, you know, those are the times to do dhikr. That's when the birds all congregate and do their dhikr. So that's why they did that. And then they put the thuman was for memorization, because you would do like the thuman, the ruba'. So beginning students would write the 1/8 of a hizb, and then then they would move to a thuman, and then they would move like to nisf al-hizb, and then some could learn even faster than that. So those are all to help us recite the Quran. My personal experience is I really like using the Quran Mujazza'ah, which is that has 30 different booklets, because it really facilitates for doing a wird of the Quran. And my advice to everybody is just abandon all these other awrad that you're doing and just do the Quran. Because traditionally the awrad were in addition to the Quran. Now people do the awrad and they don't do the Quran. Those awrad were done in addition to the Quran. So it's very important, if you're not doing a wird of Quran every day, you should not be doing these other awrad. If you're reciting the Quran once a month and you want to do more, you can either do more of the Quran or you can do the awrad. The adhkar al-sabah wal masa are actually preferred at that time, but you can do a very short version of them. They're not, you don't have to do these extensive. I'll tell you a secret that I realized. There's two reasons. It used to bother me that there were so many books on tajweed. Like, it really bothered me. Like, why do the ulama write books? There's like 1 million books on tajweed. And they all say exactly the same thing. There's no difference to any of them. They all say the exact same. Some of them are a little better produced than others, or they might have a little, but they all say. Then I realized I want to write a book on tajweed because it's brilliant. Everybody that learns from your book, you get the reward of all their recitations. So it just makes perfect sense why there's millions of books on tajweed. It's actually a really smart thing to do. And this is the same with the awrad. The shuyukh are really smart. And so they all wanted, if you're reciting the wird of Imam al-Shadhili or Sidi Ahmed Zarruq or Imam al-Haddad, they're getting all the reward of your dhikr. So it's actually really smart to do that. So this idea somehow that, we abandon this is what I think really created a lot of the Salafi impulse, was to see how far people were getting away from these fundamental things. The people that are doing, Mawlid all the time, and they're not reciting the Quran and things like that. So these are things that we have to really think about. So I would definitely advise having a wird of the Quran, even if it's one page. You'll get better if you get good at reciting the Quran. You can recite a juz in 20 minutes with a hadar. There's 3 modes of recitation. If you do the longer mode of tartil, then it's gonna take longer. But if you do the hadar, you can get through it in 20 minutes. And there's a great blessing in doing that every day. And in the Moroccan method, you know where you are. Like, today's 17th day, which is Badr, by the way. So may Allah bless the shuhada of Badr and all the people that supported the Prophet ﷺ at that time. So that's a great blessing to do it. You begin with the lunar month, and then you'll always know where you are in the lunar month. So you'll know, is this the 16th or 17th night, that we're coming into, based on the moon sighting. So that's how they do it in Morocco. So I would really recommend that. We need to get back to the Quran devotionally, but also practically using it. I have a friend, he's a really brilliant scholar in Kuwait, very, very engaging person and wonderful to spend time with, has a really phenomenal memory. But his name is Sheikh Abdullah Ma'tuq. He runs the supporting the Ighatha there. And Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayed did something with him where they fed 1 billion meals, alhamdulillah. So anyway, he does 30 khatam every Ramadan, and so that's all he does. Like, his Ramadan just. So he had a friend of his, in Kuwait, who wanted to go to Medina with him and do the khatam. I want to do it every day with you. He said, no, this takes a lot of training. It's like a marathon, right? So he said, no, it takes a lot. No, he said, I can do it. So he went there and he said after Fajr, because you have to recite really fast to do it. And he turned over and the guy was asleep. So take what you can bear, like just take what you're able to. I'm going to do last question, then we're done, inshallah.
Okay, Bismillah. We had several votes for a particular question to be asked, and that is, what is so special about Surah Yasin?
Yasin is called the heart of the Quran. It's the 36th chapter of the Quran. The actual physical heart of the Quran, the wasat al-Quran is Isra, which is quite extraordinary. So the 17th chapter is the one that is the 15th juz. It begins the second half of the Quran. But Yasin, the Prophet said, "Iqra'u Yasin ala mawtakum." The Prophet ﷺ said, some of the hadiths are weak, but the scholars have taken them up as having benefit. But everything has a heart, and the heart of the Quran is Yasin. Yasin, to me, is an extraordinary death meditation from beginning to end. So and I realized this when I did the chapter on death in the Quran, because I realized the Quran, the scent of death is on every page of the Quran. And there's a reason for that, because constant reminders of the temporality of this world will keep you on your path. And it's falling into ghafla, the heedlessness of dunya, which really is what leads people astray. And that's why events like this are so important for humanity, even though we're going to see a lot of hardships, and may Allah help us. People have to have strong iman. This is a time to really get prepared, because what's coming is going to be extremely difficult on people. The thing to remember, and this is why you read the Quran, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that the previous people were sawed in half to leave their faith, and they still wouldn't leave their faith. Like he was saying to the Sahabah, you do not know tribulation. Like you think this is difficult. I mean, they burnt Christians alive. They fed them to the lions, laughing, watching it happen. And in fact, many of the Stoics in Rome converted to Christianity because of what they saw with these Christians that were being fed to the lions, because they were all praying, and they didn't panic, and it was that type of faith that really had the impact. And Muslims know death. Muslims know struggle. You look at the Palestinians. I mean, it's amazing what the Palestinians have been through, and the fact that so many of them still believe. I mean, there are some really secular Palestinians, but overall, the Palestinians, it's quite extraordinary how they've held on to faith, despite the fact they've been in some pretty horrific, especially the people in the West Bank and in Gaza. I mean, in the occupied territories, have been really difficult times. So Muslims know these tribulations, so that's important to remember. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, bless all of you, increase you, elevate you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept اللهم تقبل منا صيامنا وقيامنا مع تقصيرنا. نحن مقصرون ونعترف بتقصيرنا، فنسألك يا رب العالمين أن تمن علينا يا منان يا حنان. اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا. اللهم بارك في المنفقين على الزيتونة. Inshallah, may Allah bless all those who support Zaytuna, support our students, support the college. May Allah bless all of you that have honored us by coming in and listening to what we have to say. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you and increase you. Really request support for the college. It's a difficult time, I'm very aware of that, but we really need your support to grow and to do more, inshallah, for the deen. Jazakumullah khairan. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Wassalamu ala al-mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Ameen. وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما.